The worlds of man burn beneath the light of their own faith. In the 41st millennium, obedience is not requested, it is carved into the marrow of every imperial soul. Billions live and die beneath the shadow of the Aquila, whispering prayers to a master they will never see. To defy is to vanish, to question is to burn, to survive is to serve. There are no innocents in the Imperium, only the loyal and the damned. From the hive slums of Necromunda to the ash wastes of Krieg, fear moves faster than any Vox signal. It is the Emperor's truest weapon, purer than bolter shells, stronger than faith alone. Because in a galaxy where even angels bleed, it is terror that keeps humanity united. The Imperium endures, not through hope, but through fear. It begins with a sound. A low, endless thrum that crawls beneath the skin, the hum of the manufactorum, the song of obedience. Beneath the copper sky of Varidon Hive, a billion souls breathe in time with that rhythm. The air tastes of promethium and ash, the tang of oil mixing with the scent of sweat and burned metal. No one speaks above the machines. Their voices have long since been absorbed into the industrial chorus that never ends. Here, in the depths of the Imperium, fear is not loud. It is quiet, patient, a whisper that coils around every thought. Children are born into its embrace before they even open their eyes. Their first lullaby is the warning siren, their first prayer a whispered plea that the shift overseer does not notice them falter. Every heartbeat is a calculation, work faster or vanish. Work harder or burn. Propaganda screens flicker on every wall, their glow cutting through the smoke. The voice of a faceless speaker repeats the same mantra. To serve is to be pure. To obey is to live. The Emperor sees all. The workers do not look up. They've heard it all their lives. But somewhere deep inside, the message has fused with their bones. It's not belief that drives them. It's survival. A woman named Lyra toils at assembly line Theta 7, her hands moving in mechanical precision. She's been there since her childhood, another faceless drone in a hive that devours its own. The flesh of her palms is layered with scars, her lungs heavy with dust. Once she dreamed of the stars. Now she fears them. To see the void is to invite inspection, and inspection means attention, and attention means death. Above her, servitors hang from steel rails, their once human faces blank beneath augmetic grafts. Their movements are perfect, tireless, a promise of what awaits those who fail. Every worker knows that to falter is to be repurposed. The Mechanicus calls it reclamation. The people call it damnation. And yet, in this terror, the Imperium finds order. Fear is efficient. It binds the hive tighter than loyalty ever could. No rebellion survives long when every neighbor could be an informer, every whisper a death sentence. The Arbites walk the corridors in their black armor, their visors like obsidian mirrors. Behind those lenses there are no eyes, only judgment. But fear alone is not enough. It must be sanctified. The ecclesiarchy knows this well. At the dawn of every shift cycle, the workers are forced to kneel in the ash-streaked square before a massive statue of the Emperor. He stands taller than the manufactorum itself, carved from adamantine, his sword pointed skyward, his gaze eternal. The priests lead the chant. Through fear, we are made faithful. Through pain, we are made pure. Their voices echo like a storm, rising over the hum of the machines. Lyra kneels with the others, her knees grinding against the metal floor. She doesn't know what faith means anymore. But she knows the alternative. The man beside her, her brother, was taken last season for speaking during the catechism. His workstation stands empty, marked only by a red purity seal, a promise that his silence serves the Emperor now. Fear has replaced family. It has replaced love. It is the only inheritance the Imperium grants its children. And still, the gears turn. Above the hive, the planetary governor surveys the city through a hololithic window. His robes are embroidered with the Aquila, his fingers heavy with sigil rings. Yet even he feels it, that invisible pressure that hangs over every servant of the Imperium. For fear flows upward as well as down. The governor knows that should production falter, His name will be recorded on a data slate in some distant administrative archive, and his ship bearing the Inquisition's seal will arrive without warning. There is no safety in rank, no refuge in faith. Only obedience. In the darkness of Veridon's hive, a forbidden thought begins to flicker like a dying lumen globe. What if the Emperor no longer watches? The question is poison, to speak it is death. Yet in the cracks between the prayers, in the pauses of the machinery, that thought breathes. It grows. And so the Imperium tightens its grip. Because fear must never fade. It must be renewed. That night, the factory loudspeakers blare a new decree. 2 workers have been found guilty of insufficient zeal. The punishment will be public. The crowd gathers in silence beneath the crimson glow of purity lamps. The Arbites drag the condemned forward, 1 man, 1 woman, both trembling, both young. The priest raises his voice to the heavens. Let their suffering remind you, only through fear does the Emperor's will endure. And as the flames rise, Lyra closes her eyes. She tells herself that their screams are hymns. She tells herself that she believes. Because in the Imperium of man, disbelief is a sin worse than death. The executions end, but their echoes linger long after the flames die. The smell of burnt flesh becomes another thread woven into the hive's air, a scent so common that even the children no longer notice. To them, it's simply the smell of life. On Varidon hive, nothing fades, it only blends into the rhythm of survival. At dawn, the smoke clears to reveal the empty square once more. The banners of the Imperial Creed hang motionless in the still air, their red cloths stiff with soot. A servitor swings overhead, spraying sanctified oils over the scorched floor while reciting a broken hymn in distorted vox tones. Its words glitch and repeat. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects. The Emperor. Before the phrase is cut off by static. No one reacts. The people have long learned not to hear the imperfections. In the worker barracks, Lyra sits on her cot, staring at the rust that blooms along the wall beside her. The light from the single lumen flickers, a soft, trembling pulse that mirrors her thoughts. Each blink of light makes the shadows shift, and in those shadows, she imagines faces. The dead, perhaps. Or the ghosts of those who were made into machines. The line between the two grows thinner every day. She remembers her mother's voice, soft, before the years had stolen it. Never look at the Arbites, child. Never raise your eyes to the priests. Never question why. It was not advice, it was survival. The kind that seeped into the marrow, generation after generation. Lyra has never seen the stars. No one in the hive has. To them, the idea of open sky feels like blasphemy. The world outside the hive might as well be myth. The administratum calls such ignorance controlled truth. The less a worker knows, the less they can doubt. Every document, every data slate, every history fragment that survives is rewritten to align with the ecclesiarchy's will. Even memories are edited through ritual confession. The priests call it cleansing, but it is erasure. The citizens call it mercy, though few survive enough years to see its end. And yet, for all its cruelty, the system works. The manufactoria run at full capacity. The tithes are met. The planetary reports mark Varidon hive as productive, loyal, and pure. The truth beneath those words, the misery, the starvation, the silent fear, never reaches Terra. It doesn't need to. The Imperium's greatness is built upon the ignorance of its billions. High above the hive's choking towers, transport craft streak through the toxic clouds like falling stars. Their engines roar with the sound of sanctified thunder as they descend toward the landing platforms. The workers pause, craning their necks, even though they know it's forbidden. The sight of an off-world vessel is rare, a break in monotony so sharp it almost hurts. From one of those ships disembarks a detachment of commissars and officio prefectus officers. Their long coats are heavy with metals, their expressions colder than the void. They've come to remind the people of their duty. Fear must be visible to remain alive. The following day, the rallies begin. The square fills with citizens as the loudspeakers scream the hymn of the Imperium, a droning chant carried on waves of machine static. The commissar stands upon the raised platform, his cap shadowing his face, his bolt pistol gleaming beneath the lumen light. He speaks only a few words, each one precise, sharp, deliberate. You are not individuals. You are the will of the Emperor made flesh. To disobey is to fracture his dream. To falter is to betray his throne. Every worker repeats the words back, 1,000 voices trembling in unison. The sound isn't harmony, it's submission. Lyra watches from the back of the crowd. Her throat moves, but no sound comes. She pretends to mouth the chant, as the Arbites scan the faces with auspex helms, searching for hesitation, for the smallest flicker of disloyalty. One moment of silence can become a death sentence. One wrong glance, and you disappear. A child nearby stumbles during the final recitation. His father catches him, too slowly. The black-armored enforcer moves without hesitation, dragging the man away. The crowd does not react. No one does. The commissar doesn't even pause his speech. It is in these moments that the machinery of fear reveals its perfection. It doesn't need guards on every street. It doesn't need to shout. The people watch themselves, control themselves, condemn themselves. Later in the barracks, Lyra whispers to a coworker, a thin man with hollow eyes named Dre Van. "How long can we live like this?" she asks, her voice barely a breath. He doesn't look at her. He just answers, "As long as they need us to." And then, softer, almost as if speaking to himself, "Maybe that's the mercy of it. We never have to think." His words linger, dangerous as open flame. Both know they should not have been spoken. Both know that tomorrow, Draven might be gone. Outside, the sky glows red with the reflection of the Manufactoria fires. The banners of the Aquila flutter against the wind, their shadows stretching across the hive walls like wings. To the billions below, those shadows are salvation. To others, they are chains. But even chains can break. And in the forgotten corners of the hive, where the Arbites rarely patrol and the light never reaches, whispers begin to stir. Faint, forbidden, desperate, yet alive. Not all fear leads to obedience. Some breeds resistance. And in the Imperium of man, rebellion always begins as a prayer whispered in the dark. Night descends upon Varidan hive like a living thing, pressing down through the narrow alleys and chimneys, seeping into every dormitory and workshop. The fires of the Manufactoria still glow faintly, an endless constellation of orange sparks against the black towers, but the workers move through the darkness as shadows themselves. Lyra walks alone, her boots silent against the metal grating, her mind heavy with the residue of the day's horrors. Fear is no longer a thought, it is the skin she wears. She passes the remnants of yesterday's punishment, scorched shapes that no longer bear resemblance to human bodies, blackened bones mingling with the ash of ceremonial oils. A servitor rolls past, its mechanical arm extended to sweep the floor, muttering fragments of a liturgy she barely recognizes. She flinches at its voice, a subconscious reaction that surprises her, even as she has lived her entire life beneath these ceilings. Fear is not an instinct here, it is education, drilled into the marrow, reinforced with flame and steel. Yet, even in the depths of this indoctrination, questions refuse to die. She wonders if the Emperor truly sees. If he watches from his golden throne on Terra, can he feel the suffering of billions who labor, burn, and kneel beneath his emblem? Or is his gaze focused solely on obedience, indifferent to pain, attuned only to results? The thought is dangerous. The Arbites would call it heresy. The ecclesiarchy would call it sin. And yet, it clings to her like a shadow she cannot shake. The underhive is quiet, almost unnaturally so. The distant hum of machinery acts as a lullaby for the living dead who populate these levels. Even the voices of those attempting to steal a moment of laughter or whispered dissent are swallowed by the vertical vastness of iron and steel. Here, rebellion is not loud. It is silence, hesitation, a glance shared across a conveyor belt, a prayer whispered in a dormitory corner. It survives only in the shadows, hidden beneath the omnipresent glare of the Emperor's authority. In the barracks, she finds Draven once more. His eyes are darker than usual, and for a moment she considers speaking again, tempting fate with her forbidden curiosity. but the words die in her throat as a patrol of Arbites passes, their boots clanging like the tolling of a funeral bell. Fear is alive, watching, assessing, never sleeping. They do not need to strike. Their presence alone is enough to ensure obedience, for the mind of a human bred to fear is more pliable than any servitor's chassis. Above, the planetary governor observes the hive in silence, a minor figure within a system that dwarfs even his authority. His decisions are catalogued and observed, his power checked by mechanisms as invisible as the fear that grips the hive below. Even the highest lords of worlds are bound by this web of obedience, for the machinery of the Imperium does not discriminate. It is impartial. It is relentless. It is perfection made flesh. Lyra sleeps fitfully that night, dreams haunted by the screams of the condemned and the whisper of thoughts she should not have. Yet in the darkness, beneath the oppressive weight of the Manufactoria towers, something stirs, a quiet seed of awareness, fragile but persistent. Not defiance. Not rebellion. Not hope. But a question. A flicker of perception that wonders if humanity, in all its billions, could be more than cogs in the machine. And in that question lies the paradox of the Imperium. For fear, perfected and sanctified, ensures survival, unity, and order, but it also leaves cracks. Spaces where doubt seeps, where whispers gather, where the machinery itself could be turned against those who wield it. The dawn will come, as it always does, bringing the screams, the labor, the obedience. The Manufactoria will roar, the Arbites will watch, the priests will chant. The machinery of fear will continue its endless, grinding work. And yet, somewhere deep in the hive, a single human heart beats a question into the dark, fragile and dangerous. Is there another way? The Imperium cannot answer. And perhaps, it should not. Because in the 41st millennium, fear is not just a tool. It is the Empire itself. The dawn drills the horizon like a cold blade, slicing through the mist of the training grounds on the ash-streaked world of Valdaris Secundus. Here, the air smells of scorched promethium, sweat, and ozone from discharged plasma rifles. The cadets move in synchronized rhythm, boots striking the ground with mechanical precision, their voices chanting the litany of duty. Every muscle, every bone, every heartbeat has been measured, corrected, and reshaped into service. They are no longer children. They are instruments, and their music is fear. Kieran, barely 16 by the reckonings of Terra, lines up at the front. His eyes are wide, but not with hope, only calculation. The training sergeants of the Astra Militarum observe him with predatory patience, their gaunt faces unyielding beneath the brims of blackened caps. One wrong step, one delayed response, and the lash or the bolt pistol will remind him of the cost of failure. Fear is the first instructor, but discipline is its echo. He recalls his mother's voice as he was brought to the training compound. Obey, Kieran. Obedience is survival. The Emperor protects those who serve. Words that once comforted now strike like chains. Every prayer recited under the gaze of the Commissar, every exercise conducted in the sweat and blood of yesterday's recruits, is a lesson in flesh. The mind bends only when the body has learned the pain of consequence. The drills are relentless. Recruits are forced to run through the ash-laden courtyards under the gaze of servo-skulls that record every twitch, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt. Their armor is heavy, unyielding, each plate a lesson in weight, endurance, and obedience. When a cadet collapses, another is compelled to drag him back to line, reinforcing the understanding that survival is shared and failure contagious. Above them, the banners of the Imperial Aquila flap in the acidic wind. The symbol of the Emperor is omnipresent, a silent overseer that judges every heartbeat. The sergeants, their voices amplified through vox grills, recite the credo. Your flesh is the Emperor's armor. Your life is the Emperor's will. You exist only to serve. Words are not suggestions. They are law, etched into the marrow by repetition and pain. Kieran moves with the others, limbs aching, lungs burning, but there is no room for faltering. Fear is now indistinguishable from instinct. Every cadet knows that hesitation will not only end them, it will mark them as a warning for those who remain. The corpses of the unfaithful are displayed at the edge of the grounds each week, their bodies preserved as grim trophies, sanctified by the ecclesiarchy and enflamed with the warning, "The Emperor watches." By midday, the recruits are forced into the firing trenches. The air vibrates with the roar of lost guns and heavy bolters. Smoke curls through the battlements, blurring faces and metal alike. Cadets fire upon moving targets, simulations of Xenos, traitors, and heretics, all labeled with the same litany. Eradicate the enemies of man, eradicate doubt. Eradicate weakness. Every missed shot brings the sharp correction of a sergeant's whip or the cold pressure of a bolt pistol to the temple. Kieran's hands are blistered, fingers trembling on the stock, yet he continues. The lashes of the sergeant's words are sharper than their whips. "Focus on the Emperor's will," they roar. "Let fear guide your aim. Let obedience sharpen your reflexes." Pain and terror are not only tools, they are lessons. Each cadet internalizes that failure is absolute, that hesitation is unforgivable. During the midday pause, the recruits kneel in formation for the ritual cleansing. Priests of the ecclesiarchy walk among them, marking foreheads with burnt incense and prayers. "Through obedience you are made pure. Through fear you are made loyal. Through pain you are made whole." Cadets repeat the words aloud, their voices trembling in the ash-thick air. Kieran's voice cracks once, then steadies, joining the chorus of thousands. This is the daily liturgy of the flesh of obedience: drill, punishment, ritual, and repetition. Each moment is designed to strip away the individual, to fuse the mind and body to the will of the Imperium. By the end of the day, the recruits are no longer children of flesh and dream, they are tools, sharpened and tempered in the fire of fear. And yet, in the recesses of his mind, Kieran glimpses a shadow of memory. A fleeting thought of laughter, of grass, of sky untainted by smoke and iron. He pushes it down. To remember is dangerous. To hope is fatal. Fear must remain absolute, the unbroken chain linking his flesh to obedience, his body to the will of the Emperor. The afternoon brings no respite. The recruits are marched to the obstacle fields, a gauntlet of jagged metal, burning sand, and simulated Promethean fires. Every wall is a lesson in endurance, every pit a test of courage, every lash of the servo-whip a reminder that weakness cannot be tolerated. Kieran's legs ache, but he does not falter. The rhythm of survival has become as natural as breathing. To pause is to invite death, to slow is to betray the Emperor. The instructors are relentless, eyes as sharp as the blades they carry, voices as cutting as the shock tongues they wield. Each correction is delivered without hesitation, a precise strike to mold the recruit's flesh into obedience. They call it forging, tempering, making human instruments capable of operating as extensions of the Imperium itself. Each cadet internalizes the lesson: the body is no longer theirs, the pain is no longer theirs, the fear is not theirs, it belongs to the Emperor. Kieran's companion, a boy named Valen, collapses beside a scorched wall. The sergeant does not pause. He steps over the boy's trembling form, his boots imprinting iron on ash, and points at Kieran. "Do you want to end like him?" the sergeant barks. The question is rhetorical. Kieran nods once, sharply, suppressing a shudder, and presses on. He is learning to obey the shadow before the hand strikes. He is learning to fear without pause, to act without hesitation, to survive without thought. By nightfall, the recruits are herded into the barracks, where the rituals of cleansing and indoctrination continue. The priests of the ecclesiarchy circulate among them, blessing scars, marking those deemed faithful, and reading aloud the lives of saints who died in obedience. Saints who gave everything to the Emperor and found salvation in flesh and blood. Each story is carefully selected to instill awe, terror, and imitation. Kieran listens quietly, eyes downcast, body trembling from exhaustion. He knows that these tales are both inspiration and warning. To reach the status of saint is impossible for someone of his rank, yet to fail even the smallest test of obedience is immediate and absolute. Every nerve in his body has been trained to respond to the Emperor's will before his own instincts, every thought filtered through the prism of duty. Sleep comes, though it is shallow, punctuated by dreams of fire, smoke, and screams. Kieran's subconscious twists the day's drills into nightmares. the laser blasts that missed, the lash that fell, the blood he could not save. Yet even in these visions, fear teaches. Every threat is a teacher, every panic a tutor. Obedience is no longer a choice. It is instinct, and instinct is survival. At the first light of the next morning, the cadets awaken to the clang of bells, signaling the start of another day of rigor. The obstacle course reappears like a living creature, the simulacrums of enemy targets blinking in the smoke, the instructors' voices slicing through the air. Kieran stands among them, body aching, lungs burning, but his mind focused. Each step is measured, each breath calculated, each glance aligned with the discipline instilled in him. Fear is no longer a foreign feeling, it is his skeleton, his muscle, his blood. Yet there is something more insidious than the drills, more penetrating than the lashes and lost fire, the quiet manipulation of loyalty. Every meal, every rest, every conversation is structured to ensure that devotion is baked into the cadet's bones. The Astra Militarum does not merely punish disobedience, it rewards conformity. Praise is scarce, fleeting, and delivered with precision, reinforcing the link between obedience and survival. Cadets who demonstrate zeal are given privileges, slightly better rations, a cot nearer the heaters, a word of encouragement from a priest or sergeant. Small, almost imperceptible distinctions, yet enough to create hierarchy, jealousy, and the internalization of fear-driven compliance. Kieran notices it slowly. The boy beside him, trembling after a mistake, now hunches beneath the weight of expectation, striving not for his own sake, but to avoid being cast aside. The machinery works perfectly. Obedience becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. And in the quiet moments, when the instructor's eyes are elsewhere, the cadets look to each other, measuring weakness, signaling loyalty, internalizing the fear as both shield and sword. By the day's end, Kieran is exhausted, broken, yet intact. His body bears the marks of obedience, and his mind has begun to accept its limitations. He knows, even if he cannot speak it aloud, that the flesh is now a tool, molded and refined, capable of sustaining the Imperium's will. He has become a fragment of something larger, a cog in a machine powered not by hope, but by fear. And in the shadows of the barracks, whispers circulate among the cadets. Not all are spoken aloud, but they are there, small sparks of thought that question, that wonder, that imagine. Is this all there is? The question is dangerous as any lash or bolt. Yet it persists, a faint undercurrent in the flood of obedience. Because even the most perfect training cannot eradicate the human mind entirely. Even flesh shaped by fear retains the possibility of doubt. Night descends over the Valdaris Secundus training grounds with a silence that feels almost unnatural, as if the world itself is holding its breath. The cadets, sprawled across the barracks in exhausted rows, are half asleep, half alert, their muscles aching, hearts still drumming with the rhythm of drills and discipline. The Imperium has made them instruments of obedience, but the soul is never entirely silent. Even here, in the suffocating discipline and unrelenting fear, flickers of thought survive. Kieran lies on his cot, eyes fixed on the ceiling panels blackened with soot and streaked with scorch marks. Each mark tells a story, though no one speaks of it aloud. A cadet punished for hesitation, a recruit, repurposed for failure, a whisper of rebellion snuffed before it could take root. In this place, punishment and instruction are inseparable, a dual-edged blade wielded by the Imperium to forge flesh into loyalty. He recalls the faces of his instructors, the sergeants with eyes like grinding steel, the priests with lips moving in endless incantations, the commissars whose glances could fracture a man's will. They are not merely enforcers. They are vessels of the Emperor's will, reflections of the machinery that shapes all who live and die in his service. Each one exists to remind the cadets that survival is never a right, it is a reward earned through obedience, vigilance, and terror. Kieran feels the weight of this truth settle into him. He has been broken and rebuilt so many times that the boundaries between fear, duty, and instinct are no longer distinct. When he lifts his arms to stretch, the muscles ache not only from exertion but from the invisible chains that now bind him to the Imperium's rhythm. Pain is no longer external, it is internalized, a compass guiding him toward survival. Yet, even in his subjugation, there is awareness. Kieran observes the cadets around him, noting the flickers of hesitation, the subtle tremors of doubt, the tiny acts of rebellion that are quickly swallowed by the weight of fear. These are the moments the Imperium cannot entirely extinguish. The human mind, even when shaped by lash, drill, and liturgy, retains the capacity for questions, for whispers, for fleeting glimpses of other possibilities. Outside, the night wind cuts across the training ground, carrying the scent of burnt promethium and scorched earth. The distant hum of the manufactoria reaches even here, a reminder that life in the Imperium never pauses. Somewhere beyond the walls, other worlds endure the same cycle of fear, obedience, and sacrifice. Somewhere else, billions of souls labor beneath banners of the Aquila, their flesh and minds guided by the same unyielding hand. Kieran closes his eyes, letting the hum of the universe settle into him. In the darkness, he repeats the litany of obedience, not out of belief but necessity. Each word is a link in the chain that binds him to survival. My flesh is the Emperor's. My life is the Emperor's. My will is his. He whispers them until the cadence of fear becomes rhythm, the rhythm becomes instinct, and instinct becomes a quiet certainty that he will endure another day. And in that endurance, the Imperium finds its greatest triumph. Fear has molded him into something more than human, yet less than free. His body is a vessel, his mind a conduit for devotion, his very existence a testament to the power of obedience. The machinery of fear is perfect, but it is never complete. Because somewhere, in the hidden corners of the barracks, in the spaces between drills and prayers, questions flicker like fragile sparks. Not hope, not rebellion, just awareness. And awareness, in the Imperium, is always dangerous. By morning, Kieran and the cadets will rise again. They will run, fire, march, kneel, and chant. Their bodies will strain, their minds will bend, and their flesh will continue to be shaped by fear. And yet, the faint ember of doubt will persist, hidden beneath layers of discipline, prayer, and indoctrination. This is the flesh of obedience, a body honed to perfection, a mind trained to serve, and a soul quietly whispering questions it dare not speak aloud. Because in the Imperium of man, even fear is alive. And the living, in turn, are never entirely broken. The hive world of Therax Prime stank of sulfur and ash, a city of blackened towers stretching into a sky veined with industrial smoke. The sun, when it rose at all, was a blood-red disk that offered no warmth, only illumination. Here, heresy had grown like a cancer in the neglected alleys, whispers of doubt mutating into dangerous beliefs. And in the Imperium, no corruption went unpunished. The streets trembled under the approach of the inquisitorial convoy. Voxcasters transmitted warnings in 1,000 dialects, broadcasting the presence of the Ordo Hereticus across the hive. The people fled to their homes or gathered in the squares, hands raised in instinctive prayer. Many hid their faces behind veils or respirators, but no disguise could mask the terror in their eyes. Fear was absolute, and it had arrived in the shape of black-coated inquisitors and armored arbites. In the central square, a platform had been erected beneath the towering statue of the Emperor, its gaze immortal and unyielding. The condemned stood shackled, their faces pale with realization. Among them was a low-ranking priest of the ecclesiarchy, a man accused of preaching doctrines deemed impure. Beside him, a handful of hive artisans and scribes trembled, accused of spreading heretical ideas through pamphlets or whispered words. Their crime was simple, curiosity, the faintest flicker of independent thought. High above, the Inquisitor observed through a lens built into her helm. She was an agent of judgment, her presence a blade against hesitation. Every twitch of a hand, every flicker of a pupil, every involuntary shiver could confirm guilt, could condemn. Her voice, carried through vox amplifiers, was calm but unyielding, as if the very cadence of her words had been etched by the Emperor's own will. "Citizens of Therax Prime," she began, her tone carrying across the square. "You have witnessed the corruption of flesh and spirit. You have allowed heresy to fester in your homes, your manufactoria, and your temples. Today, we cleanse. Today, the Emperor's light burns away the impurity." The square trembled, not from fear alone, but from the anticipation of ritualized annihilation. Flames roared to life at the edges of the platform, fed by promethium and oil, hissing as they consumed the wooden scaffolds that had been erected to hold the condemned. The smell of burning resin and hair filled the air, mingling with the copper tang of fear. Kieran, standing at the edge of the hive under the supervision of his superiors, felt the pull of dread tighten his chest. Though not yet a participant in this purge, he understood its purpose intimately. The fire of purity was not merely punishment. It was spectacle, lesson, and warning all in one. Every scream, every ash cloud rising into the polluted sky, reinforced the notion that deviation from the Emperor's will was anathema, and that obedience was the only path to survival. The condemned were forced to kneel as priests moved among them, chanting prayers of purification. The Inquisitor's voice cut through the liturgy, an invisible whip guiding the ritual. Her judgment was absolute, unquestionable. One condemned artisan, a young woman barely older than Kieran, whispered a prayer to the Emperor, begging for mercy. The Inquisitor paused for a heartbeat, her gaze piercing, before the flames were raised. The smoke swallowed her words, her plea, and her body. From the upper galleries, spectators, citizens and soldiers alike, watched in silence. The ritual was more than execution, it was indoctrination. Fear became tangible, an instrument that molded the hive's collective psyche. Those who survived would carry the memory of the flames, the screams, the absolute power of the Imperium, embedded in their bones and nerves. Even the innocents learned to pray not out of faith alone, but from the instinctive desire to avoid the same fate. Kieran's gaze shifted to the faces of his fellow cadets. Eyes wide, jaws clenched, hearts hammering in unison. The fire of purity was not distant, it was immediate, personal. It would follow them into the trenches, the manufactoria, the halls of command. It would carve obedience into flesh and bone as surely as the sergeants carved it into their minds. And yet, in the rising heat and smoke, some of the condemned whispered to each other. Not prayers, but questions. Not fear, but defiance, faint and fragile as a spark before wind. It was a reminder that even the most absolute ritual could not erase every human thought, every forbidden notion. The flames climbed higher. The screams mingled with the chants. And the hive learned again what it meant to obey, that deviation, however small, could not be tolerated, and that the fire of purity would always burn in the Imperium's name. The fire's heat pressed against Kieran's skin even from a distance, a relentless reminder that the Imperium's justice was not merely administered, it was performed. The smoke curled through the square in ghostly patterns, carrying the cries of the condemned to every corner, into every alley and dormitory. It was a lesson in visibility. Obedience must be witnessed to be enforced, fear must be communal, and the mind of every observer was now complicit. The Inquisitor moved among the captives with precise, predatory grace. Each movement was deliberate, each word chosen to strip away hope and strengthen terror. She spoke of the Emperor's vigilance, of the consequences of impurity, of the eternal pain awaiting those who dared to defy his will. Her voice was calm, but beneath the veneer lay the weight of inevitability. The fires would claim all who resisted, and none could escape. Kieran's eyes shifted to the condemned artisan, the young woman whose whispered prayer had been swallowed by the flames. Her expression had not fully vanished from his mind, defiance and fear intertwined, a human contradiction that the Imperium both feared and sought to eliminate. Even as the fire consumed her body, a flicker of understanding rose in him. This was more than punishment, it was spectacle, indoctrination made flesh. Each scream was a lesson, each flickering flame a teacher. The Arbites moved in silent formation along the perimeter, their boots marking perfect cadence on the stone floor. The soldiers' visors reflected the inferno like pools of dark light, eyes impassive behind the lenses. Some cadets shivered at the sight, but the veterans, hardened by years of ritual and battlefield experience, did not flinch. Kieran understood then the dual purpose of the spectacle. It was designed to shape not only the condemned but the observers, to ensure that fear would travel through generations and across rank, binding all to the Emperor's will. In the upper galleries, the priests chanted the litany of cleansing, voices raised in harmony with the crackle of flame. Their words flowed over the cadets like molten iron, hardening the resolve imposed through drills, lashings, and endless repetition. Obedience was now a reflex, a muscle memory entwined with terror. Those who watched knew that hesitation or doubt was more than a moral failing, it was a sin punishable by death. Kieran thought of Dre Van, of the faint whisper of a question that had escaped him in the barracks days ago. Here, it would have been unthinkable to voice it. Fear was not only present, it was absolute. And yet, in the faces of the condemned, in the subtle defiance that lingered even as they burned, Kieran glimpsed the same spark he had felt before, awareness. Fragile, fleeting, but unyielding. It was a thought that could not be killed by flame alone. The Inquisitor raised her hand, signaling the next wave of punishment. Chains rattled, and the Arbites dragged forward those accused of aiding the heretical priests, scribes, artisans, even low-ranking military functionaries. Each was forced to kneel beneath the Emperor's statue, their foreheads pressed into cold stone, as the priests recited the sanctification. Flames licked closer, hot enough to burn the scent of sweat from their skin. Kieran's stomach twisted, but he did not look away. He had learned that survival was not just about obedience, it was about observation. To understand the mechanisms of fear, to internalize the lessons, was to endure. He catalogued the ritual in his mind, the methodical progression, the precision of the priests, the rhythm of the Arbites, the cadence of the screams. Everything was controlled. Everything was designed. Nothing was accidental. And yet, even in this carefully orchestrated purity, the human mind proved stubborn. Some of the condemned whispered to each other, soft words meant to comfort or confuse or simply mark existence. Their murmurs were lost to the wind, carried away in the smoke, yet Kieran felt the resonance. Even here, in the crucible of fire and fear, humanity persisted. By nightfall, the square was littered with ash and scorched remnants, but the lesson had been delivered. The citizens had witnessed what the Imperium demanded, the cadets had observed what obedience required, and the Inquisitor's judgment had been absolute. Fear had once again proven its potency, visible, ritualized, and eternal. As the shadows lengthened across their X-Prime, Kieran realized something chilling. The fire of purity was not about vengeance or retribution. It was about calibration. It was about maintaining the machinery of the Imperium, adjusting the minds of billions to the same frequency of fear and obedience. Every scream, every flicker of flame, every whispered prayer, even those lost to smoke, they were all components in a vast network of control. And in the darkness, he whispered a single thought that he could not voice aloud. Fear shapes the flesh, fear shapes the mind, but even fear cannot kill every question. The aftermath of the purge was quiet, but it was a quiet that carried weight. Therax Prime exhaled smoke and ash like a wounded beast, the square littered with the remnants of ritualized judgment. The survivors, those who had observed, prayed, and obeyed, moved like shadows, their eyes hollow yet vigilant. Kieran lingered at the edge of the square, absorbing every detail, the scorched banners, the blackened cobblestones, the lingering smell of burned resin. Each sense was a lesson, reinforcing obedience through observation, embedding fear into memory. The Inquisitor departed as silently as she had arrived, leaving behind a silence so thick it seemed to press against the skin. The Arbites remained for hours, cataloging, interrogating, ensuring no whisper of defiance lingered in the corners or alleys. Even when they left, their presence was felt. The machinery of fear did not rest simply because the enforcers withdrew. It had been internalized. The citizens of Therax Prime would carry the echoes of the flames, the cadence of prayers, the weight of authority, into every aspect of their lives. Kieran walked among them, careful to keep his distance from the scorched remnants of the condemned. He felt the imprint of the ritual on his body, a tightening in his chest, the echo of instinctual submission ingrained in muscle and nerve. Fear had not only been observed, it had been absorbed, and he understood the delicate calculus behind it. Obedience was no longer taught, it was performed, repeated, ritualized, and witnessed, until it became instinct. Even as he walked, Kieran noticed subtle acts among the survivors, a bow too deep, a word whispered too carefully, hands folded over hearts in silent supplication. The Imperium had learned long ago that fear works most efficiently when it is invisible, internalized, and communal. These acts were not simply tradition, they were survival, the silent testimony that the machinery of the Emperor worked even in the absence of immediate threat. Above the city, the red sun sank behind the haze, casting long shadows across the black towers. Kieran felt the weight of the day settle into his bones, the enormity of the Imperium's reach pressing against his mind. The fire of purity was complete. Order had been re-established, obedience calibrated, and the machinery of fear had proven itself once more. Yet beneath the surface, he sensed faint disturbances, tiny sparks of doubt, shadows that the flames had not reached. They were insignificant, perhaps, but persistent. In his cot that night, Kieran closed his eyes, replaying the square, the Inquisitor, the screams, the chants, the flames. He could still hear the faint murmurs of the condemned, the fragments of questions whispered too softly to survive the fire. And in those murmurs, he recognized a dangerous truth. The Imperium shapes flesh and mind with fear, but it cannot completely erase the human spirit. Some awareness endures, fragile but unbroken. The machinery of obedience is vast, spanning billions of souls across countless worlds. It is relentless, unyielding, and absolute, but Kieran realized that it is not perfect. Even here, in the apex of fear's triumph, the smallest sparks of thought flicker. They are hidden, whispered, fleeting. Yet they exist. He did not act on them. Not yet. But the awareness lingered, a shadow at the edges of his mind, as persistent and dangerous as the echo of the fire of purity itself. Fear had shaped him, tempered him, instructed him, but it had also revealed the paradox of the Imperium. The more perfect the machinery, the more persistent the small, unyielding sparks of consciousness it cannot fully consume. And somewhere, beyond the haze of Therax Prime, across the vast expanse of hive worlds and manufactoria, those sparks multiplied in silence. They were invisible, uncounted, and yet they carried the faintest glimmer of possibility. Even in the 41st millennium, where fear reigns supreme, the human mind could not be wholly extinguished. Kieran lay back, staring at the blackened ceiling of the barracks. The lessons of the fire of purity had been learned. Obedience was absolute, instinctual, and disciplined. Yet in the shadows of his consciousness, a single question remained unspoken, unformed: is fear enough? The answer would not come here, on this world. It would come later, in whispers, in choices, and in actions that the Imperium could not fully predict or control. For even the might of the Emperor, the machinery of the Imperium, and the fire of its purity cannot extinguish every spark of awareness, no matter how carefully it is hidden. And so the hive sleeps, the ashes settle, and the machinery waits. Because fear is eternal, obedience is taught, and humanity, for all its suffering, persists. Terra is a city-planet of impossible scale, a world where steel towers pierce clouds veined with golden smog and streets wind for thousands of kilometers beneath layers of habitation. The surface is a mosaic of sanctuaries, manufactoria, imperial courts, and endless spires, each dedicated to the eternal service of the Emperor. From orbit, the planet appears as a glittering crown, yet every gleam hides shadows deeper than any underhive. Fear and devotion are not local here, they are planetary, institutional, woven into every brick and circuit. The high corridors of the Adeptus Terra resonate with quiet authority. Couriers, archivists, and servitors glide along endless halls, delivering data slates, liturgies, and mandates. Behind closed doors, the High Lords convene, each a master of their domain. The Arbites oversee law, the Administrator monitors billions of records, the Ecclesiarchy dictates the scope of faith, and the Inquisition watches over all. Their power is absolute, yet fragile, balanced upon ritual, fear, and rumor. A single misstep could topple a minister from grace, or consign an entire planetary sector to flames. Rumors circulate even here. Whispers of the Emperor's apotheosis, of fragments of his consciousness guiding Terra's machinery, of unseen forces that intervene in human affairs. The High Lords speak carefully, their words measured, their eyes betraying only what duty allows. Some call it blasphemy. Others call it caution. All call it survival. The line between truth and legend is blurred, a necessary ambiguity that allows the machinery of the Imperium to function without questioning the impossible weight it carries. In the Senate of the High Lords, the discussion is clinical, yet the tension is palpable. A sudden spike of psychic activity has been detected in Segmentum Solar, whispers of heretical cults spreading through a minor hive world. The Inquisitor assigned to investigate reports odd phenomena, lights shifting unnaturally in Manufactoria, servitors acting outside protocols, prayers muttered in forbidden dialects. Fear and superstition mingle with dread. Even here, the machinery of the Imperium is not immune to uncertainty. The Ecclesiarch debates the proper measures with the High Lord of the Administratum. The debate is less about morality and more about control. To punish too harshly could disrupt production, and sow fear that destabilizes obedience. To hesitate could allow impurity to fester, threatening the sanctity of the Emperor's domain. Each word is weighed against the vast machinery of billions of lives, each syllable a potential spark of chaos or order. Above them, in the golden throne, the Emperor rests, or so it is perceived. His body, enshrined and sustained by ancient machine spirits, and the constant devotion of the Imperium, is a locus of light and mystery. Pilgrims, servitors, and custodes move through the chamber, their faces solemn, their steps precise. The Astronomican glows faintly, projecting its psychic beacon across the galaxy, guiding fleets through impossible distances. Yet few dare to contemplate the nature of the Emperor's consciousness, and fewer still question the fragments of perception reported by those who have glimpsed the throne. To question is dangerous, to imagine is perilous, to doubt is death. And yet shadows linger. Rumors of the Emperor's awareness, or absence, permeate the corridors of power. Servitors whisper of subtle distortions, priests mutter prayers for understanding, and some high lords move with hesitation, unsure whether decisions are guided by the Emperor or by echoes of his will filtered through machinery, human judgment, and time itself. Every decision, every decree, is made under the shadow of uncertainty, even as the machinery of the Imperium demands absolute obedience. Kieran, now older, has been dispatched to Terra under orders from the Arbites. The fire of purity, the indoctrination, and the drills have prepared him for obedience, but not for comprehension of the scale he now faces. Walking the corridors beneath the spires, observing the glimmering skyways and chanting priests, he senses both awe and terror. The machinery of the Imperium is not merely local or planetary, it is planetary, stellar, and metaphysical, a network that spans the galaxy and enforces devotion through fear, ritual, and surveillance. Every glance, every step, every sound is a reminder of the Emperor's presence, or the perception of it. Fear is everywhere, yet it is also internalized, a silent law woven into the minds of those who walk these halls. Kieran feels the weight of it pressing against him, shaping thought, guiding decisions, and reminding him that obedience is survival, and that survival is the Imperium's most precious commodity. And as he ascends toward the upper galleries, glimpsing the golden light that bathes the throne chamber, he wonders again, quietly, in the depths of his mind, if fear is everywhere, and obedience is absolute, then where does free thought reside? Where, if anywhere, does humanity survive when every step, every action, and every heartbeat is measured against the machinery of the Emperor? The answer is unknown. Even here, in the heart of Terra, shadows linger. The upper galleries of Terra are a place of light and shadow, where golden illumination strikes cold marble and deep darkness gathers in the corners, untouched by the artificer's lamps. Kieran moves along the bridgeways, escorted by custodian guards whose presence is both protective and menacing. Each step echoes with the rhythm of the planet's machinery, servitors trundling along, vox grills vibrating with silent communication, and the distant hum of the Astronomican resonating through the spires. It is a cathedral of control, an edifice built to awe and intimidate in equal measure. The whispers of those who have glimpsed forbidden truths linger in the corridors. Scholars and psychers murmur of fragments of the Emperor's consciousness, of presences that watch and judge from beyond perception. Some claim the Astronomican is more than a navigational beacon, that it is a thread tying the living to something eternal and unknowable. Others insist it is merely machinery, an artifact of ancient technology so powerful that mortal minds cannot comprehend its function. Kieran listens without comment, aware that curiosity in this place is a subtle danger, and that every observation is a choice between survival and death. In the Senate chambers, the High Lords debate the spread of a heretical cult in a minor hive sector. Data slates flicker, showing reports of psychic anomalies, unsanctioned rituals, and altered manufactoria protocols. The Ordo Hereticus demands swift action, while the Administratum urges caution. Every word is measured, for one wrong decision could cascade across Terra and beyond. The weight of billions of lives presses upon the Council, yet the Emperor remains silent, a distant constant whose will is interpreted through ritual, tradition, and fear. Kieran watches as an Inquisitor rises, her robes flowing like shadow, her voice carrying authority without effort. She speaks of purification, of the eradication of doubt, of the necessity of absolute obedience. Her words are not merely recommendations, they are commands, enforced by the implicit threat of flame, pain, or exile. The High Lords nod, their expressions inscrutable, yet the tension is palpable. Even here, on the seat of the Imperium, obedience is never voluntary. It is a ritualized necessity, a performance conducted in light and shadow. Outside the chambers, Terra's streets churn with movement. Hive populations continue their endless toil, manufactoria smoke curling into the red sky, and servitors patrol ceaselessly. Citizens bend to their routines, observing the rituals of faith and law, repeating prayers, and performing gestures of devotion as instinct rather than choice. Fear, ritual, and spectacle have been internalized so completely that the machinery of obedience functions without constant supervision. Kieran notes it quietly. Even at the heart of the Imperium, the system thrives not only through enforcement but through the pervasive presence of fear and ritual, shaping thought as surely as drill shapes flesh. A whisper reaches him, a fragment of rumor carried on the breath of a servitor. The Emperor's awareness is incomplete. Some fragments of his consciousness are said to oversee certain facilities directly, while others act through proxies, interpreters, and machinery. The truth cannot be known, yet the suggestion is dangerous, tantalizing, and unavoidable. Even Kieran, trained in obedience and fear, feels a stir of unease. Terra is absolute, yet the machinery that governs it is imperfect, filtered through human minds, liturgy, and ancient devices whose operation is not fully understood. Ascending toward the golden throne, Kieran glimpses the custodes moving with inhuman precision, their visors reflecting the gleam of the Emperor's enshrouded form. The Astronomican psychic light pulses faintly, a reminder of the Imperium's reach and the unbroken chain of devotion across the galaxy. Pilgrims bow, servants scurry, and the machinery hums with the rhythm of the Emperor's projected will. The entire planet is a stage, every action and thought orchestrated through fear, ritual, and reverence. Kieran cannot help but reflect on the paradox. Obedience is absolute here, yet it is shaped by perception, rumor, and fragmented understanding. The Imperium relies on certainty and fear, yet uncertainty persists even at its heart. Every ritual, every sanction, every decree functions not because it is perfect, but because the machinery of fear is internalized. Even High Lords, Inquisitors, and Custodes operate under a veil of unverified perception, performing obedience to a will that is both omnipotent and unknowable. As he steps into a corridor that descends deeper into Terra's labyrinthine structures, Kieran senses the weight of shadows pressing from all sides. They are not merely physical, they are political, spiritual, and metaphysical. Terra's machinery is immense, unyielding, and eternal, yet it is haunted by whispers, doubts, rumors, questions that no ritual can erase. And in that moment, Kieran realizes that fear alone may sustain obedience, but it cannot extinguish the sparks of awareness that flicker in the hearts of those who serve. Shadows over Terra are never fully banished. They linger in corridors, in minds, and in the spaces between ritual and law, reminding all who dwell there that even in the Imperium's heart, perfection is only an aspiration, not a fact. The corridors beneath the throne chamber were colder than Kieran expected, not in temperature but in atmosphere. Light and shadow wove together like predators, and every sound, servo hum, distant footfall, the whisper of robes against marble, felt amplified in the cavernous halls. He moved deliberately, observing the custodes' discipline, noting the subtle signals exchanged through visors and gestures. Even here, the machinery of obedience was a language spoken silently, perfectly, and enforced through the weight of presence alone. In a chamber adjacent to the throne, data slates flickered with reports of minor rebellions, psychic disturbances, and clerical infractions. Kieran watched as scribes transcribed each word with meticulous care, their hands trembling slightly beneath gloves. Mistakes, no matter how small, were not tolerated, for even an error in the transmission of knowledge could ripple outward, compromising obedience elsewhere. Knowledge itself had become a vessel of fear, a tool to reinforce the Emperor's will across light years and countless minds. The golden throne loomed above, enshrined in golden filigree, encased in machinery older than most planetary governors. Pilgrims and servitors moved about the chamber with precise rhythm, their devotion unquestioned, yet their presence suffused with awe that bordered on terror. Kieran felt it keenly, the weight of belief, the weight of responsibility, the weight of an entire galaxy balanced on a single locus. Fear was the axis upon which the Imperium turned, and obedience the only currency of survival. Whispers circulated even here, fragments of rumor that the Emperor's awareness was both complete and fragmented, that some aspects of his will were administered directly, while others filtered through proxies, ritual, and human interpretation. The custodes moved as extensions of this will, yet even they were shadows of something more profound, more unknowable. Kieran understood, with the faintest shiver of comprehension, that the perfection of the Imperium is an illusion maintained by machinery, ritual, and terror. A High Lord passed, robes sweeping the floor, eyes hidden yet calculating. Even the most senior of humanity's servants cannot fully comprehend the forces at work on Terra. Every decision, every command, every act of judgment is filtered through centuries of tradition, fear, and observation. Obedience is measured not just in action, but in thought, in hesitation, in the absence of doubt. And yet shadows linger. Questions persist. Rumors whisper that even the Emperor himself is incomplete, a consciousness fragmented and mediated by the machinery of his throne. Kieran paused in the gallery, looking down at the golden light suffusing the throne chamber. Pilgrims bowed, their movements ritualized and perfect, while custodes maintained positions that seemed carved from stone. The Astronomican pulsed faintly above, a psychic beacon guiding fleets across the galaxy, a constant reminder that the machinery of the Imperium extends beyond comprehension. Fear, ritual, and obedience converge here in a perfection that is, in truth, perpetually incomplete. He thought of the cadets, the fire of purity, and the thousands of worlds under the Imperium's hand. The machinery functions because it is witnessed, internalized, and amplified by fear. Yet awareness persists, subtle, fragile, and dangerous. Even here, at the heart of the Imperium, the sparks of thought that cannot be extinguished stir quietly. They are invisible to all but those who observe with careful attention, but they exist nonetheless, defying absolute control. The shadows of Terra are not simply absence of light. They are the subtle reminders of imperfection, of uncertainty, of the fragility that exists even in the most tightly controlled machinery. Kieran understood now that obedience is a dance with fear, not with certainty, that ritual, spectacle, and punishment maintain control, but cannot eliminate awareness entirely. The Imperium relies on shadows as much as it relies on light, for in the gaps between ritual and law, questions linger. As he descended into the lower galleries, the vast machinery of Terra hummed around him. The Astronomican's pulse reached across the void, linking billions of lives to the unseen will of the Emperor. Kieran's footsteps echoed, solitary but purposeful. He carried with him the lessons of fear, obedience, and ritual, but also the faintest ember of awareness, a spark that refused to be extinguished. Shadows linger here, yes, but in them lies possibility, tiny, imperceptible, and dangerous. The Imperium is eternal, vast, and unyielding. Yet even at its heart, the shadows endure. And Kieran knows that the vigilance of the Emperor, the machinery of obedience, and the perfection of ritual cannot fully suppress what is human. Questions, sparks of thought, and the persistence of awareness continue, subtle as breath, powerful as fear. The stage is set for the final act, the Emperor's Vigil, where the narrative will examine the metaphysical, rumor-laden dimensions of Terra, the Golden Throne, and the limits of fear and obedience across the galaxy. The Golden Throne rises above Terra like a monument to eternity, an altar of power and fear suspended in a cathedral of light and machinery. Its golden filigree gleams with a brilliance that no mortal eye can fully endure, yet shadows gather in its folds, cast not by light but by the incomprehensible weight of eternity itself. Kieran steps carefully along the polished marble, his boots echoing in rhythm with the distant hum of servitors, the muted pulse of the Astronomican, and the subtle, pervasive whispers that drift through the galleries. Every sound carries authority, every step a reminder that Terra is not merely a planet, it is a nexus of fear, obedience, and unrelenting vigilance. The Emperor's body is encased in a lattice of arcane machinery and ancient devices, a living reliquary maintained by servitors, rituals, and the constant devotion of billions of souls across the galaxy. Pilgrims move with solemn precision, chanting prayers whose meaning is half forgotten, while the Adeptus Custodes patrol with the discipline of statues brought to life. Kieran observes them quietly, noting the perfection of their movements, the clarity of their focus, and the subtle imperfection in human perception that no machine or ritual can eliminate. Even here, at the apex of obedience, awareness persists. Whispers surround the Golden Throne. Scholars, psychers, and even High Lords murmur of fragments of the Emperor's consciousness extending beyond his enshrined form, guiding events across the galaxy. Some claim that certain aspects of his awareness can directly influence the machinery of Terra, that the Astronomican is more than a beacon but a psychic network intertwining life, obedience, and ritual across the stars. Others argue that these are merely interpretations, conjectures, or comforting myths designed to reinforce fear and devotion. The truth is unknowable, and that is the Imperium's greatest power, uncertainty wrapped in awe. Kieran watches a custodian pause beside the Emperor's throne, adjusting the filigree of a servitor conduit, a silent gesture performed with reverence and precision. He wonders how much of the Emperor's presence is real and how much is perception. Every action here is filtered through layers of ritual, fear, and devotion, and yet the machinery functions. The Astronomican pulses faintly, its psychic beacon cutting through the void, a reminder of the Imperium's reach, the unbroken chain of obedience, and the subtle threat of annihilation for those who fail. Even the High Lords operate under the weight of this vigilance. Their debates, their decisions, their carefully measured words are all tempered by the invisible presence of the Golden Throne. Fear is not absent here, it is magnified, distilled, and ritualized. Every motion, every order, every glance carries consequences that ripple across light years. Kieran understands that this is the ultimate lesson of obedience, not merely to survive, not merely to follow orders, but to internalize vigilance itself, to carry the weight of authority in thought and action alike. And yet shadows linger. Rumors of imperfection, of fragmentation, of absence pervade even the most sacred spaces. Some claim the Emperor does not perceive all directly, that certain decisions are mediated through intermediaries, that the machinery, ritual, and human will act as filters. These whispers are dangerous, fleeting, but persistent. Kieran feels the subtle weight of them pressing against his consciousness, an acknowledgement that the Imperium's perfection is both absolute and incomplete. From the galleries above, the light of Terra falls in fractured patterns across the chamber, illuminating the servitors, custodes, and pilgrims with stark contrasts of gold and shadow. The rhythm of the Astronomican pulses beneath the surface, a heartbeat felt rather than seen, reminding all who dwell here that obedience is a living, breathing construct, enforced by fear, ritual, and devotion. Even the most meticulous actions of the High Lords, the Inquisitors, and the Adeptus Custodes are themselves guided by perception, fear, and fragments of knowledge that may or may not reflect the Emperor's direct will. Kieran's mind drifts to the hive worlds, to the cadets trained in the fire of purity, to the rituals that enforce obedience through spectacle, pain, and fear. He understands now the full scope of the Imperium's machinery. It spans from the smallest alleys of hive sectors to the apex of Terra itself, binding billions of souls through ritualized terror, faith, and the faintest sparks of awareness that cannot be fully extinguished. Fear is not simply a tool, it is the lifeblood of obedience, and the Imperium's most enduring weapon. And in that realization, Kieran feels the duality of the Emperor's Vigil. It is absolute, terrifying, and omnipresent, yet within it lies the fragile persistence of thought, awareness, and subtle defiance. Shadows endure even at the height of light, questions persist even under the weight of eternity, and humanity, fleeting, fragile, dangerous, remains alive, even when constrained by fear, obedience, and ritual. The vigilance of the Emperor is eternal, the machinery of Terra unyielding, and the Astronomican pulses with silent authority across the stars. Yet in the spaces between ritual and perception, in the shadows of light, Kieran senses what the Imperium cannot fully control, the sparks of awareness, the glimmers of thought, and the faint, unspoken questions that define what it means to be human. The chamber surrounding the golden throne seemed to breathe, though the air was still and the servitors silent in their duties. Kieran moved along the polished walkways, the rhythm of his boots echoing against walls adorned with icons older than most human records. Each pulse of the Astronomican vibrated faintly through his bones, a constant reminder that the Emperor's reach extended across the galaxy. Even so, there were cracks, whispers that the machinery was imperfect, that fragments of consciousness acted through intermediaries, that even the vigilant custodes could not perceive everything. Kieran's eyes traced the flowing robes of a nearby inquisitor, her presence as much ritual as enforcement. She gestured subtly, and servitors adjusted conduits, relays, and arcane machinery that maintained the Emperor's life. It was a choreography as intricate as any theater, performed with absolute precision and silent authority. The Imperium depended on it, yet Kieran knew that behind every perfect motion, human judgment and imperfection still lingered. The machinery could enforce obedience, but it could not extinguish awareness. The pilgrims filing past the throne whispered prayers, many forgotten by the speaker, some so faint they might never have existed. Each prayer, each act of devotion, fed the machinery, reinforced ritual, and strengthened the web of fear and obedience that kept billions aligned with the Emperor's will. Kieran realized that this was the ultimate balance, power maintained not through omniscience alone, but through ritualized observation, fear, and devotion so complete that questioning became instinctively dangerous. Even the faintest spark of curiosity could be fatal. Yet the shadows persisted. Even within this pinnacle of order, Kieran noticed subtle signs, a misaligned servitor limb corrected by a custodian, a murmur of doubt between a high lord and an aide, the hesitant glance of a scholar uncertain if what they perceived was real or legend. These small anomalies were unremarkable in isolation, yet they reminded him of an unsettling truth. The Imperium's perfection was a construct, a carefully maintained facade, and beneath it lingered fragments of uncertainty, of imperfection, of thought that escaped total control. Kieran's gaze returned to the enshrined form of the Emperor, a figure both eternal and inaccessible, surrounded by a lattice of golden filigree and machinery older than memory. His consciousness, so it is rumored, stretches across the galaxy, guiding fleets, overseeing worlds, and ensuring obedience. But even as the Astronomican pulses, even as the custodes stand vigilant, the High Lords deliberate, and the pilgrims pray, Kieran understood that awareness endures in ways machinery cannot touch. Sparks of thought, questions unspoken, defiance unrecorded, these survive even in the heart of absolute power. He thought back to the cadets at the Fire of Purity, to the hive worlds where flames shaped obedience, to the rituals that taught fear as both lesson and survival. The Imperium thrives because fear is internalized, yet he saw now that no machine, no ritual, no vigil, even one as monumental as the Emperor's, can completely dominate the human mind. Shadows exist everywhere, even in the brightest light, even beneath the most piercing gaze. The chamber's golden glow reflected across Kieran's visor, illuminating the intricate machinery that sustained the Emperor and the countless conduits connecting Terra to the rest of the galaxy. In that light, he felt both the majesty and terror of the Imperium. Fear, ritual, obedience, and devotion form a network more vast than any fleet, more absolute than any law. Yet within it lies uncertainty, awareness, and the fragile persistence of humanity. It is a paradox the Imperium tolerates, perhaps even relies upon, for without it, fear alone would stagnate into blind submission. Kieran stood still, listening to the subtle hums, the distant cadence of steps, the faint resonance of prayers. Terra is eternal, the Emperor vigilant, and the Imperium unyielding. Yet even here, in the seat of absolute power, awareness persists. The sparks of thought that cannot be extinguished drift in shadows, whispering questions, possibilities, and faint defiance. And in that realization, Kieran understood the Imperium in its fullest scope. It is absolute and fragile, terrifying and awe-inspiring, eternal and incomplete. Fear shapes the flesh, obedience binds the mind, and ritual sustains the machinery. But humanity, even in its most constrained form, endures. Shadows linger, questions persist, and in the heart of the galaxy, the vigil of the Emperor watches over both obedience and the sparks of thought that might, one day, redefine it. Kieran turns away from the throne, stepping into the corridor where light and shadow mingle, carrying with him the knowledge that even the Imperium's heart cannot extinguish what is human. And as he moves forward, the whispers of possibility echo faintly through the halls of Terra, reminding all who dwell here that the vigil endures, but so too do the sparks of awareness. The Emperor watches. The Imperium obeys. And the shadows wait.